My name is Latrice Bennett. I'm 30 years old. And this is the story of how my father laughed at my uniform, only to be humbled the next day when his CEO called me Colonel. The wind howled across the empty fields of Omaha as I drove down the old road that led to my childhood home. The sun was setting behind heavy gray clouds, smearing the horizon in streaks of bruised gold and fading light. In the back of my SUV, my dress uniform hung inside a thick garment bag, freshly pressed, decorated with commendations, and bearing the insignia of a full colonel in the United States Army. It had taken me over a decade to earn every stripe, every star, every ounce of respect that uniform demanded. But in my parents' eyes, it still meant nothing. I hadn't been back here in 6 years. Not since the last time I tried to come home for Christmas and my mother told me Sean had already booked the guest room. "You're always flying around somewhere," she said. It just didn't make sense to hold a space open you might cancel on anyway. The truth? I was deployed in Syria, scrambling to prevent a cyber attack on Allied medical facilities. But to them, it was always a maybe from me. And a yes from Sean. Sean, my younger brother. The golden boy. The executive. The pride of West Core Systems and our family. Recently promoted to lead strategic development on some billion-dollar project called ArcLight, and my mother couldn't stop gushing about it on the phone last week. I hadn't said much. I knew the name. I knew it well. Because, what they didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I was the military liaison in charge of evaluating West Corps' performance on that exact contract. That's why I came home. Well, that, and maybe I wanted to see how it felt to walk back into the house that had always made me feel like I was too much, or too little, but never just enough. I pulled into the driveway. Same cracked step. Same peeling white paint. Same porch light flickering in the wind like it couldn't decide whether to die out or stay burning out of stubbornness. I got out, brushed the dust from my sleeves, and took a deep breath. I didn't wear the uniform tonight. I would wait. Let them treat me like the afterthought they always had, the daughter who'd wandered too far from what they thought success looked like. The front door creaked open. "Finally came home, huh?" My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Thought you'd cancel last minute again." "I was in Syria then," I replied, stepping inside. There was a security alert. "Sure. There's always some excuse." The smell of onions hit me like a wave. Her hands moved quickly across the cutting board, her back never turning. I could see the fridge covered in Sean's photos, graduation, wedding, ribbon-cutting ceremony. My pictures had vanished. The one of me getting promoted to major, the one she once hung up just for balance, was gone. "Sean's on his way," she said brightly. "Just got appointed head of strategic development. The CEO chose him herself." I nodded. "That's great. I'll congratulate him." She lit up. "Megan bought a new electric SUV. The one with the butterfly doors. I think it's fully autonomous or something. They're planning a vacation to Tuscany." Still not a single question about where I'd been. What I'd done. What I'd faced. Just Sean. Always Sean. I carried my bag upstairs. My old room was a time capsule, posters from college, cheerleading medals from high school, the teddy bear I won at the county fair. Nothing new. Nothing real. Just the version of me they liked best, the one that hadn't disappointed them yet. I unzipped the suitcase and pulled the uniform from its bag. My silver eagle insignia glinted under the light. I ran a finger across the embroidery, Colonel L. Bennett, and for a brief second, I wondered what it would feel like if this name meant something to the people downstairs. But tonight, it would stay hidden. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Sean's voice was loud, cheerful, already performing. "Well, the little army princess came home," he announced, stepping into the kitchen. "Not an emergency this time, huh?" "No," I replied. "Just visiting." "Right," he laughed. And grabbing a free dinner before the big company summit tomorrow. I heard someone from the Pentagon is coming to check our progress. Probably some crusty old general. Or cranky colonel, Megan chimed in with a smirk. My mother laughed. Sean, tell them about the ArcLight Phase 2. He puffed his chest. I'll be leading the systems integration team. Ms. Taylor, the CEO, said I bring fresh energy. I'll be working directly with the military rep, probably someone with no idea how tech really works. I stirred my soup, hiding a small smile. Sounds like a big deal. Oh, it is, he said. Has anyone else in the family done anything like that? The question hung like a dare. I put down my spoon. Yes, I'm still in the military, I said to Megan, who'd asked with the tone of someone commenting on an antique collection. And no, it's not exhausting. It's my job. It's just such a shame, my mother murmured. You had such a bright future in management. If you'd followed Sean's path, you might be a VP by now. I didn't respond. Just sipped water and looked down at my hands. Then Sean leaned over. So what are you now, still a lieutenant? I looked up slowly. Let's just say I've had a bit of advancement. Soldiers just follow orders, he shrugged. It's not like business, where the skilled ones actually lead. I didn't take the bait. Not tonight. Because tomorrow? Tomorrow would be the reckoning. And no one at that table had any idea it was coming. I barely slept that night. The wind thrashed against the windows like it was trying to claw its way inside. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house, every whisper of movement downstairs. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was anticipation. A quiet storm building inside me. Tomorrow, they would see. Not just my family, but everyone at West Corps who looked past people in uniform like we were part of a prop set. At 5 a.m., I was up. I took a long, hot shower, let the steam soak into my skin, and laid out the uniform on the bed. Each ribbon was pinned with precision. Each medal cleaned the night before. The silver eagles at my collar, clear and brilliant, signifying the rank that demanded more than a decade of relentless work, risk, and grit. I didn't put it on yet. Instead, I stepped into the kitchen in jeans and a sweater. My mother was already awake, sipping coffee. She didn't look at me. Morning, I said quietly. She nodded. Don't be late for Sean's big day. He was up all night practicing. I didn't reply. Just grabbed a banana, peeled it slowly, and walked back upstairs. It was still dark outside when I zipped up the uniform, tugging each sleeve snug, brushing the edges clean, adjusting the belt until it rested just right. My name. My rank. My story, all stitched and pressed into fabric. At exactly 7:20 a.m., I walked out the door and got into my car. The garment bag, now empty, stayed behind on my childhood bed like a ghost shed from my past. My heels clicked sharply on the pavement when I stepped out of the car at West Corps Systems headquarters. A security guard stood at the entrance, young, nervous. Good morning, Colonel Bennett, he said, standing straighter than he probably ever had before. Morning, I nodded. I'm here for the ArcLight review. Yes, ma'am. Everything's ready. You're expected on the 12th floor. Conference room A. I passed through the lobby like I'd done it 100 times. Except I hadn't, not like this. Not in uniform. Not with a mission. Every executive I passed looked up, some pausing mid-conversation. A few even stood as I entered the elevator. There's something about the presence of a high-ranking officer, even in corporate halls, that straightens postures and silences voices. The elevator chimed on the 12th floor. I stepped out. And there he was. Sean. He was standing with a group of engineers, laughing over something on a presentation board. When he turned and saw me, the color drained from his face like someone had flipped a switch. His jaw moved, but no words came out. "Good morning, Sean," I said evenly. "Latrice. What are you doing here? Why are you?" My father appeared from the hallway, still in mid-conversation with two other board members. He stopped short when he saw me. His gaze dropped immediately to the insignia on my collar. I could see his throat tighten, his breath catch. He said nothing. Before anyone could break the silence, another voice cut through the tension. "Colonel Bennett?" It was Elaine Taylor, CEO of West Core Systems. She strode forward with grace and confidence, hand extended. "I wasn't expecting you in person." "I felt it was important," I said, shaking her hand firmly. "This contract demands more than emails." She smiled, then turned to the gathered staff. "Everyone, allow me to introduce Colonel Latrice Bennett, the Department of Defense representative for the ArcLight project. She is the final authority on all evaluations, approvals, and continuation decisions from the military side." The room seemed to freeze. My father didn't speak. Sean stumbled back a step, still gripping the edge of his tablet like it might keep him upright. The pride that had soaked into his voice last night? Gone. Replaced by something he clearly wasn't used to, dread. "We'll begin in 10, Elaine said. "Colonel, please let us know if there's anything you need before we start." "Everything is in order," I replied, glancing once, and only once, at my father. Inside the conference room, my name was printed clearly on the placard at the front, Colonel L. Bennett, Department of Defense. The boardroom buzzed with quiet tension as more executives filed in. I sat at the head of the table, laptop open, notes organized, report folders stacked neatly. My presence wasn't symbolic, it was tactical. I was here to assess. To decide. And my family? They were just another part of the room now. Sean and my father entered last. They avoided eye contact. As if seeing me would confirm this wasn't some elaborate prank. At exactly 8 a.m., the meeting began. Elaine offered a brief welcome, then turned the floor to me. "Colonel Bennett, please walk us through the day's agenda." I stood. The silence was sharp. "The ArcLight project," I began, "represents a critical investment in next-generation cyber defense technology. As of this morning, the Department of Defense has logged multiple performance concerns tied to data redundancy, penetration testing vulnerabilities, and Phase 2 readiness." My voice never shook. "Today, I am here to determine whether this contract proceeds. Any oversight, any lapse, will be grounds for suspension." I glanced at Sean. His face was pale, mouth slightly open. "I expect full transparency," I continued. "And full cooperation." No one interrupted. No one questioned. No one laughed. For once, they were all listening to me. And I wasn't just in the room. I owned it. I had been in countless mission briefings, top-secret threat assessments, and cyber fortification war rooms. I'd walked into remote bases lit only by emergency lights, handled breaches that could have exposed entire troop deployments, and spent months reviewing clearance-level vulnerabilities. But nothing, absolutely nothing, rivaled the feeling of sitting at that boardroom table across from the two men who had spent years treating me like an afterthought. The meeting moved forward with a strange, reverent silence. Sean, seated 2 spots to my left, barely looked up from his documents. My father sat stiffly across the table, flanked by 2 other board members, his mouth drawn in a thin line. Elaine Taylor continued with the agenda, but the room no longer revolved around Sean. It revolved around me. "For our Phase 2 systems audit," she said, "Colonel Bennett will provide direct oversight. All documentation has been forwarded to her office, and today she'll be sharing her preliminary findings." I didn't wait for her to finish. "To start, your data synchronization module shows a 3.4-second lag in the redundant node pathways, which doesn't meet the department's Tier 1 latency threshold. I'll need a revised framework by the end of next week." Someone at the tech team table scribbled notes rapidly. Sean blinked like he didn't understand what he just heard. And the access logs, I continued, showed a failed security sweep after a simulated breach last month. I reviewed the logs personally. Someone attempted to mask it using admin override scripts. There was a shuffle across the room. I saw Sean glance toward one of the developers. I didn't name names. Not yet. But my message was clear. I wasn't here to play nice, and I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here to do my job, and no one in this building, not even my own blood, would be spared from scrutiny. Elaine nodded. Colonel Bennett, we appreciate your detailed review. We'll address these concerns immediately. Good, I replied. Because if this were a deployed system, that lapse would have cost lives. You could hear the breath go out of the room. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, but by then, the dynamic had shifted permanently. Sean's team tried to recover their confidence with a slick presentation, colorful graphics, buzzwords like quantum architecture and multi-layer defense schema. But every time they spoke, they glanced at me. Measuring. Bracing. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Because I was the one they were trying to impress now. When the final slide closed, Elaine stood. Thank you, everyone. Colonel Bennett, we are truly honored to have you here. I stood as well. I'll deliver my full evaluation by the end of the month. If the requested adjustments are made satisfactorily, the contract can proceed to final clearance. Applause broke out. Not from everyone, certainly not from my father or Sean, but enough to fill the room with a sense of gravity. I gathered my documents calmly, slid my laptop into the sleeve, and walked out without a backward glance. Until a voice stopped me just outside the door. Colonel Bennett, came a young voice. I turned. It was an assistant, a junior employee maybe a year or two out of college. He looked nervous. Mr. Marcus Bennett is waiting for you in the auxiliary conference room on the 10th floor. With Mrs. Bennett and Mr. Sean. They said they'd like to speak with you privately. Of course they did. I took the elevator down in silence. The 10th floor was quiet, removed from the usual buzz of executive activity. As the doors opened, I stepped into a smaller room, less polished, with more windows and less control. They were already there. My father stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking down into the parking lot like it held the answer to a question he couldn't ask. My mother sat on a long, gray couch, clutching her purse like it was the only anchor in the room. Sean leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the smugness of yesterday replaced by something closer to shame. I walked in, my boots silent on the soft carpet. You asked to see me? No one spoke at first. Then, my mother broke the silence. Latrice, is it true? Her voice cracked. Are you really the military supervisor on the ArcLight project? Yes, I said simply. And I have been for 6 months. My father turned around, pale as I'd ever seen him. 6 months? I called, I said. Texted. Emailed. Every time I got a promotion, I invited you to attend. Each time, it was the same response, silence, or a conflict. Sean finally spoke. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me in front of the CEO. I looked at him, eyes steady. It wasn't about you. You're not that important. His mouth opened. Then closed. You're leading a development team. I'm leading a national contract with the Department of Defense. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here because it's my job. But you. I cut him off. Let me be very clear, you're smart, Sean. But you don't understand the weight of what this project means. You treat it like it's just another step up the ladder. I treat it like lives depend on it. Because they do. My father stepped forward. Latrice, maybe I was wrong. I waited. I always thought the military was just something you'd outgrow. Something temporary. But, now I see. I was the one who didn't understand. No, I said. You didn't want to understand. He swallowed hard. I'm proud of you. I studied his face. For once, it didn't wear judgment or disappointment. It wore something closer to humility. My mother stood, her eyes wet. I'm sorry, she whispered. For not asking more. For not being curious. For always making you feel like you weren't enough unless you were like Sean. I said nothing at first. Then, quietly, I didn't need you to imagine it. I just needed you to ask. She nodded, her chin trembling. Can you forgive us? I didn't answer with words. I simply walked over, placed my hand gently on her shoulder, and let it rest there for a beat. Not because I had forgotten. But because I had grown beyond the need to be seen. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was healing. Slow. Uneven. But real. The conversation on the 10th floor ended with more silence than closure, and yet, for the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like space. Room to breathe. Room to begin something new, or at least, to stop pretending I wasn't tired of trying to earn what should have never needed to be earned, acknowledgement. I left them there, my father still at the window, Sean slouched in disbelief, and my mother gripping the edge of her purse like it held the answers to the questions she never asked. As I stepped out into the hallway, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Like something old had burned away in that room, not in a blaze of fury, but in quiet honesty. And beneath the ash, I saw myself for what I truly was. Whole. I flew back to Washington that evening, the city lights below flickering like some living constellation of purpose. My apartment in Navy Yard was waiting. 2 bedrooms, high ceilings, bookshelves stacked with technical manuals and dog-eared notebooks. No trophies. No framed medals. Just the kind of peace I'd built with my own hands. And yet, despite everything, despite the validation, the rank, the status, I still found myself staring at the ceiling that night, thinking back to the beginning. To when I first told my parents about ROTC. About the military scholarship that would pay for college, if only they could see what I saw in it. They hadn't seen it. I remembered the dinner table, the brochure I'd printed and highlighted, the nervous excitement in my voice as I explained how I could still study engineering, still serve my country, still lead. My father barely looked up from his fork. The military is for people with no options, he'd said coldly. You don't need to throw away your future for a free education. My mother had chimed in gently, not cruel, just dismissive. You said you wanted to be a CEO. Why waste that kind of potential? And Sean, already accepted into West Corps' internship program, had laughed. Come on, Latrice. You. Army boots and camouflage? You'd last a week. 3 months later, I shipped out to Fort Leonard Wood for basic training. I didn't tell them when I left. I didn't even call when I arrived. The weather was brutal. Cold rain that soaked through every seam. Mud that didn't just stain your skin but tried to crawl under it. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the strongest. But I didn't quit. I graduated with honors. Commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Army. I sent them the photo, me in full dress uniform, saluting with a mix of exhaustion and pride. No reply. Years passed. Ranks climbed. I went where I was needed: Asia, Europe, the Middle East. Each step was a new test. And I passed them all. Alone. There was one night, 3 years ago, that stayed burned into my memory. The Utah base. A silent, flickering red light on my monitor. A routine maintenance alert that didn't feel routine. I dug into the code, tracing breadcrumbs of malicious access points buried deep in layers of protocol. It was a breach. A sophisticated, slow bleed infiltration from inside our own systems. If it succeeded, Hundreds of classified operations could have been exposed, troop locations, movement routes, communication intercepts. I didn't sleep for 38 hours. Every firewall I built, they tried to circumvent. Every defense I raised, they tested. But I didn't break. By dawn, I'd isolated the breach, traced it, and created a honeypot decoy system that tricked the intruder into a dead loop. I saved not just the files, I saved lives. A week later, the Secretary of Defense sent me a handwritten letter of commendation. I framed it and placed it in my footlocker, next to the unopened birthday card I got from my parents 4 years late. Soon after, I was promoted to major. Then lieutenant colonel. Then came the call from Lieutenant General Eleanor Grant, one of the most decorated women in the history of military cyber defense. She didn't mince words. I've been watching you for 3 years, Bennett. You're sharp. You're fast. But more importantly, you finish what others abandon. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. She handed me a file across the desk. West Core Systems. They're developing a new cyber defense program, ArcLight. It's risky. Expensive. High stakes. You'll be our lead. My eyes flicked down at the documents. The company letterhead. The project description. And then the list of lead engineers. Sean Bennett. My brother. I know you have history with this company, General Grant said. If that's a problem? It's not, I replied. But it was. Not because I held a grudge. But because I didn't. I was done proving myself. I just wanted to do my job. Better than anyone else. Even if they never saw me coming. 5 weeks later, I stood in the main hall of the Pentagon, flanked by high-ranking officials from every branch of the military, as General Grant pinned the Silver Eagle to my collar. Colonel. Not Lieutenant. Not little army princess. Colonel. No one from my family came. I stopped expecting them to show up years ago. But there was still a small ache in my chest when the seats I reserved remained empty. It wasn't about needing them there. It was about knowing they chose not to be. Still, I carried that rank with pride. I flew to Omaha the following week. I stayed quiet. Patient. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't flash my ID or wear my uniform to dinner. Because the moment that would change everything wasn't meant to be announced. It was meant to be revealed. And when it was, when the doors of that boardroom opened, and I walked in wearing the weight of every sacrifice I'd ever made, I saw it in their faces. Recognition. Not just of the uniform. But of the woman wearing it. 6 months passed after that day in Omaha. 6 months of silence where there used to be noise. No more sidelong jabs from my brother about my career. No more condescending phone calls from my mother offering unsolicited career advice. No more quiet disappointment leaking through my father's voice whenever I mentioned work. It was like a fog had lifted, and in the clear light of truth, they had finally seen me. I moved forward. Not out of spite, but necessity. At Cyber Command, my days were filled with classified briefings, wargaming simulations, and reviews of new quantum cryptographic systems. Our world was changing fast, and I had to be faster. We had just rolled out a new system capable of isolating synthetic data manipulation, what most people called AI deepfakes, in under 30 milliseconds. The demand was relentless, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving under pressure. I was thriving in it. One Friday evening, I was preparing to leave the office when an email came through. Subject, Defense News Feature, The Colonel Behind ArcLight. Attached was a pre-release PDF of an article scheduled for national syndication. A full-page profile. My face. My name. My story. In the image, I stood beside General Eleanor Grant at the ArcLight launch event in Arlington. We shook hands in front of a live demo display glowing with a clean, secure interface I'd personally helped redesign. The caption under the photo read, Colonel Latrice Bennett, quiet force, loud results. For a moment, I didn't breathe. It wasn't the attention. It wasn't even the praise. It was the validation. That someone had looked at the body of my work and decided it mattered enough to tell the world. I printed a copy. Not for my office. But for my father. I didn't plan anything extravagant. Just a simple dinner in my apartment. I reached out to the family with a message that read, If you're free next weekend, I'd like to host dinner. Nothing formal. Just come as you are. To my surprise, every one of them said yes. That Saturday evening, the air in D.C. was warm and heavy with the scent of cherry blossoms. My apartment overlooked the river, windows open, soft music playing, the aroma of grilled meat and garlic potatoes filling the space. I wore no uniform. Just a gray blouse and jeans. Civilian clothes. Comfortable. Neutral. Real. The doorbell rang just after 6. When I opened the door, my father stood there, older than I remembered, but somehow smaller too. In his hands, something wrapped carefully in paper and twine. He looked me in the eyes. No stiffness. No mask. I had this framed, he said quietly. Saw it in the article. Thought you might want one for yourself. I opened it slowly. Walnut wood. Crystal clear glass. The article. My photo. My name. It was more than a picture. It was acknowledgement in physical form. Thank you, I said softly, and stepped aside to let him in. My mother came next, holding a red baking box, the one she used when we were kids to carry cookies to the neighbors. Inside was apple cinnamon pie. My childhood favorite. Less sugar this time, she said awkwardly, then smiled. Figured you're watching your health. I smiled. You remembered. I remember more than I say, she replied. Sean and Megan arrived last. No flashy suits. No passive-aggressive energy. Just a bottle of red wine and a hesitant warmth in Sean's eyes. Not the kind you like, I know, he said, but I read it pairs well with grilled food. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. We sat, we ate, we talked. Not about promotions or rank. Not about who was more successful. But about real things. Childhood memories. Stupid fights over the remote. The time Sean accidentally locked himself out in his pajamas. For the first time in years, the table didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a home. Later, while clearing dishes, Sean stood beside me at the sink. I read your review from the DoD, he said. The one where you flagged our compression protocols before we even noticed. That probably saved us millions in rework. I dried a plate. Just doing my job. But you do it better than most, he said. I used to think business was the real world. But now? I think the real world is the one where decisions have weight. He paused, then added, I'm proud of you, Latrice. Not just for what you've done. But for how you never let anyone stop you. I looked at him. Really looked. And I didn't see the smug kid who always needed to win. I saw a man trying, maybe for the first time, to understand. When the table was cleared and the laughter had settled into soft conversation, the doorbell rang again. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and nearly froze. Standing there, wearing her signature dark green uniform and holding a bottle of champagne, was none other than General Eleanor Grant. Sorry I'm late, she said, lifting the bottle slightly. Got caught in a meeting with the secretary. But I told them, I have a more important appointment tonight. My father stood so quickly from the couch he nearly knocked over a lamp. General Grant, it's an honor. We've heard so much about you. And I about you, she replied, shaking his hand with military firmness. You raised one of the sharpest officers I've ever had the privilege of working with. My father said nothing. But his eyes glistened. The evening ended with dessert and coffee. Stories from deployments, lessons from the field. Eleanor shared how I'd once corrected a flaw in a NATO data relay in under 7 minutes during a live test. I've met a lot of brilliant people, she said. But Latrice? She's rare. Not just smart, but grounded. That's harder to find. When everyone left that night, my father lingered at the door. You know, he said, his voice low, you asked me once if I thought the military was just a detour. I did. He looked down, then back at me. But now? I think it's the road you were always meant to walk. And I was too blind to see the path. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Because that was enough. For now. Weeks after that dinner, the framed article still sat on the mantel of my apartment. I hadn't hung it yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I looked at it, it stirred something deeper than pride. It reminded me of everything that came before. Not just the accomplishments. But the silence. The years spent being invisible to the very people who now sat at my table praising the person they never really tried to know. And though I accepted their apologies, and I did, I also remembered. I remembered the nights spent staring out of barracks windows, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The birthdays alone in desert tents, the nights curled in my cot still damp from storm patrols, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the seconds until morning. I remembered the time I was 25, working with an Allied unit overseas. We intercepted a live data breach aimed at a communications satellite system. The breach was traced back to a supposedly friendly contractor, an insider mole. While others panicked, I initiated an immediate lockdown, rerouted command protocols through a temporary partition, and manually encrypted the backup relay. It bought us 5 hours, just enough time for our team to dismantle the source and plug the hole. When the incident was over, my commanding officer told me quietly, "You may have just stopped World War III." No one at home ever heard about it. Not because I didn't want to tell them, but because I knew they wouldn't believe it mattered. Back then, I'd tried, just once, to explain to my father. We were on a call. He'd mentioned Sean's new title, his bonus, his high-rise apartment with the city view. Then he asked, like it was nothing, "So, are you still traveling for training stuff?" Training stuff. I could have said, "Yes, Dad, I'm stabilizing communication grids in the Balkans while neutralizing threats from AI-guided malware." But I didn't. I just said, "Yes." He moved on to talk about Sean's wedding planning. But now, things were different. Not because I'd changed. But because the truth had finally arrived in a way that couldn't be ignored. Truth, after all, isn't a whisper. It's a spotlight. And it had finally turned toward me. A few months after the family dinner, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a national cyber defense symposium in Boston. It wasn't mandatory. But when the Secretary of the Army personally recommends you, you don't say no. The ballroom was massive. Red carpeting. Soft chandeliers. Hundreds of attendees from military, tech, and intelligence circles. I stood behind a podium, not in full dress uniform, but in a dark gray suit, the eagle insignia still glinting from my lapel. The speech wasn't just about cyber defense. It was about being invisible, and then choosing to be seen. There was a time, I said, scanning the crowd, when I believed I had to shout to be heard. That if I didn't prove my worth over and over again, someone else would write my story for me. But I learned something important: silence can be your ally, if you use it to sharpen your edge. And when the moment comes, and all eyes turn to you, make sure you have something to say. Applause erupted. As I stepped down, a man from the audience approached me. Tall, mid-40s, sharp suit. He introduced himself as a senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs. "I just wanted to say, Colonel," he said, "I've never seen a room so still. You've got a gift. We could use that voice in places far beyond code reviews." I thanked him politely. I wasn't sure what he was implying, yet. 2 days later, I found out. A letter arrived at my Pentagon office, signed by the Undersecretary of Defense. It was an invitation, no, a recommendation, to be considered for a civilian liaison role directly advising congressional security committees. Top level. High stakes. And most importantly, a platform. Not just a command from behind closed doors, but to influence the national conversation on how this country protects its most vital infrastructure. And I wasn't sure if I wanted it. For so long, I'd been the invisible daughter, the underestimated officer, the quiet expert in the back of the room. Rising to that level meant shedding even more layers. Becoming a name, not just a badge. But then I remembered a moment, small, almost forgotten. I was 13, sitting on the back porch with my grandfather. A man of few words, he always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and cedar. "You've got fire in you," he said, pointing to my chest. "Don't let anyone convince you to water it down." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. Now I did. That fire never left. It just got quieter. Smarter. More precise. That night, I emailed the Department of Defense and accepted the nomination. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. His voice still had the Nebraska twang I used to resent. Now it just sounded human. "Latrice? I wanted you to hear it from me," I said. "I've accepted a new role. I'll be advising the congressional committees on cyber defense policy. I'll still be active duty, but I'll be visible. Nationally." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "I always thought pride had to be earned," he said. "But now I think sometimes, pride has to be allowed." I didn't know how to answer that. So I just let the silence speak for me. 6 weeks after I accepted the advisory role, I stood behind a podium at the United States Capitol. This time, there was no anonymity, no tactical silence. I wasn't the officer quietly correcting firewalls in the background. I wasn't the forgotten sibling sitting through a family dinner filled with someone else's applause. I was Colonel Latrice Bennett, lead military advisor on national cyber defense, with top-level clearance, full strategic authority, and a platform that reached across military, corporate, and civilian boundaries. And this time, they were all there to see it. My mother sat in the front row beside my father, her eyes already glassy before I even spoke a word. She wore a dark blue dress I'd never seen before, and her hands clutched each other in her lap, knuckles white. Sean and Megan sat behind them, dressed simply, respectfully. Sean looked older somehow. Less like someone performing success, more like someone trying to earn peace with himself. I didn't look at them as I began my speech. I looked into the bright cameras. The watching press. The congresspeople and generals and security analysts gathered in that polished hall to hear what I had to say about our nation's digital future. We often think of defense in terms of weapons. But the real battleground is information, I said, voice firm. And while our adversaries use deception, code, and chaos, our greatest asset is truth. Because in truth, there is strength. And in strength, there is clarity. The words came easily. Not because I rehearsed them, but because they had lived inside me for years. When the speech ended, there was applause. And when I stepped down from the platform, General Grant was the first to meet me. She didn't say anything. Just nodded once, the way warriors do when words aren't needed. But it was what happened next that I'll never forget. My father rose to his feet. Slowly. Intentionally. And then, he began to clap. My mother followed, standing beside him. Sean stood too. And then, one by one, others joined them. It wasn't a standing ovation orchestrated by politeness. It was something deeper. Something earned. As I stood at the edge of that stage, in the very center of the nation's power, I thought about the girl who once stood in her dorm room holding a crumpled ROTC pamphlet, heart full of fire and hope. They hadn't seen her. But I had. And I never stopped becoming her. That night, back in my apartment, the city lights stretched endlessly beyond my window. The framed article from Defense News hung near my desk, flanked now by another, a recent headline that read, Colonel Bennett to lead cyber strategy at national level. The phone buzzed. A message from Sean. If you ever need someone to bounce ideas off of, well, I'm still figuring things out. But I'm listening now. I replied simply. Good. Because we all have work to do. A few minutes later, a new message from my mother. You were always meant to lead. I just didn't understand the path. But I see it now. And I see you. I closed the phone and stood quietly by the window. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't even chasing legacy. I was standing in it. Not because they had finally recognized me. But because I had long ago learned to recognize myself. And now, finally, the world had caught up. No matter how long the road or how heavy the silence, truth has a way of rising. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest strength, if they refuse to stay quiet forever. If this story moved you, subscribe to Revenge Echoes. Share your own moment of quiet power in the comments. And remember, justice isn't always loud, but it always echoes.